When I was in medical school, I was taking a course called histopathology, looking under the microscope at various diseases. And I was looking at a squamous cell cancer, a tumor, and I noticed there was a tremendous amount of inflammation surrounding it. And what that looks like under the microscope is it looks like little blue confetti around the tumor. That's because we have to stain the tissue, and those are immune cells. And so I went to the professor and said, is it possible that inflammation is driving this process rather than, and of course it was a knee-jerk reaction. No, no, it's the immune system reacting. And so anything I looked at, any tissue, no matter what it was, there was inflammation, whether it was arteries or brain tissue or pancreas. And so I put this together. I said, obviously there's something going on here. And I believe that inflammation's actually driving disease, and it's also driving the aging process. Now, the thing to know about, unfortunately, about science and scientists is that I always thought that scientists were very much like me and curious with an open mind. And it's not that. It's more like a religion. So you have a belief system. And if someone violates that belief system, you don't get curious and say, let me look at you just react. And so that was the issue. But another discovery of going around that histopathology course, we also took something called embryology. And we studied that, and basically all of our tissue is made up from three different layers. And I thought it was interesting that something called the ectoderm makes both brain and skin, because at the same time I was also doing my psych rotation. And I found that when people were taking psychoactive medicines, their skin looked better and improved. And I started thinking about that. Well, if the ectoderm makes both brain and skin, then it might make sense that anything has activity in the central nervous system could be either positive or negative for skin. So that's what I call the brain beauty connection. I talk about that a lot in my new book. So that gave me a. So I then had this thing. I said, okay, I'm without a doubt, inflammation and aging are go one in hand in all disease processes. Was not accepted by my peers. In fact, it got me into a lot of trouble. And as I say, you can always tell a pioneer by the number of arrows in their back, and I could attest to that. So I was a I was just doing, I had my practice in dermatology, but also was a clinical assistant clinical professor at the time. And there was a lot of anger about me and my books, and I was branching out. So they basically told me to leave. And now, 25 years later, I'm mainstream and I'm a hero. Well, one of the things I did was, with the frustration of the medical community and rejection to a number of journals, I thought, you know what? When I talk to everyday people and I explain what my thoughts are, they accept it very readily, and they're not like not schooled people. I mean, whether they have an education or not, they have a lot of common sense. So I said, what if I go ahead and write a book about this whole thing? And so I did that, and the book I was really writing it for other doctors, but a friend of mine was an author, and he said, "I want you to talk to my book agent and have her look at what you're doing." So because I was writing a book about for the average person, but I thought that this would be for doctors, and she said, "No, no, this isn't for doctors. This is for everybody." I said, "Well, isn't it boring?" She said, "Are you kidding me?" She said, "This is fascinating." So I wrote the first book, and it was called. It had a different title, but when the publisher said, "No, the new title is The Wrinkle Cure," I said, "Well, that kind of trivializes the content, does it not?" He said, "Don't worry about it." And so we went out there, and I told the story about inflammation and aging and my discoveries. And at the same time, um, the publicist got me some appearances on television. And one thing that I had developed was the anti-inflammatory diet because I was very much interested in nutrition. I did that early on. And I discovered that the anti-inflammatory diet makes you look very different within a few days. Because when you drop inflammation, what happens is you lose a lot of edema, which is water, and a lot of it sits in our faces and our necks and all that. And also, it increases something called nitric oxide. It starts working really well. So, what I noticed in my patients when I put them on the 3 days of the anti-inflammatory diet, they looked really different. And I did that with hundreds of patients, especially those people who had special events coming up. So I got a call from Diane Sawyer, and she said, "Listen, I'm reading your book here." She said, "I'm really fascinated. I wonder if you would come in and visit me at my office and talk about it." I was really thrilled, of course. And she was an amazing woman. You met her. She was articulate and fun and beautiful and everything there was. And she said, I really love this book, but I have a problem. She opens the book and she points to one paragraph, and she said, the problem I have, it says here, fine, if you're eating the 3-day diet, you will look 10 years younger in 3 days. And she said, I think this is hyperbole. I said, Diane, I know what you're saying. It sounds like ridiculous. I've done this hundreds of times. She said, well, would you be willing to come on to my program and come in, say, on a Tuesday and lay the foods out for the people? And then I'm going to choose 3 women from ABC. And you're going to put them on this diet. And then we're going to come back 3 days later. And she said, we'll see if there's a difference. She said, but I just want to warn you, if it doesn't work, I'm going to roast you in front of the entire nation. I said, well, it always works. I said, unless they cheat. So when Friday came along, it wasn't in the studio. It was in Bryant Park, this beautiful park, and behind the big library on Fifth Avenue. Beautiful sunny day. And I went there and I went to the trailer, and Diane was in there getting her makeup put on and her hair is done. And I said good morning to her. She was really in a great mood. It's a beautiful day, Dr. Perricone, you're ready? I said, yes, I am. And so we stand up and she said, ready to be roasted? I said, well, if they didn't cheat, we're okay. So we stepped out of this trailer, and she just looks and she stops and freezes and she's looking like 30 yards away where the 3 women are. Said, oh my God, I can see a difference from here. So we went on the air, and when they did those before and afters, it was incredible. By the time I walked back to my hotel room, it was like already up there. I was like on a New York Times bestseller list for like 24 weeks, and you could not find a piece of salmon or blueberries in the nation because they're all being bought up. Okay, so that was the beginning, and so I was really happy about this because as a dermatologist, yes, I created products that were based on anti-inflammatories, but using products. It makes your skin look healthier, but it's not going to reduce your risk of heart disease and breast cancer and all that. So, what I really thought the big accomplishment of my book was getting people on this anti-inflammatory diet. It changed their lives in a big way, and so it was really gratifying. It was interesting. All of my research in that 10 years, it all came down to one molecule that seemed to be controlling everything: metabolism, memory, exercise, immune function. Everything came down to one thing, and it was a neurotransmitter called acetylcholine. So I wrote this book, and I said, "Well, what's going to be the title?" I said, "Well, it's going to be obvious. There's one molecule. So how about we call the title as a beauty molecule?" And that's the name of the new book. Neuroceuticals just means talks. It's kind of a hybrid of basically things like vitamins and diet and so it all comes together in lifestyle. And so there are certain supplements that will increase levels of this beauty molecule, which is called acetylcholine. And so there's a number of things you can do, both the way you eat, the supplements to take, lifestyle changes, meditation, and all this long list. Because what was the most incredible thing I found in my research was that this molecule, acetylcholine, which is in our brain, it helps us make memories. It makes us contract our muscles because the nervous system, the motor system sends it down, but it's not a direct connection to the muscles. There are receptors for acetylcholine, so it squirts this stuff out, and the muscles contract, and there's immune functions, there's anti-inflammatory functions. It's just incredible what this acetylcholine does. So it had to be called the beauty molecule. And what's interesting is, so neuroceuticals are a way of eating, a lifestyle approach, supplements, and they were all affecting and elevating levels of acetylcholine in the body for health and beauty. So it made sense to say neuroceuticals because it works in the central nervous system. But the most incredible finding was that scientists took some lab animals. I think it might have been mice or rats. That's in my book, and so it's well documented. And they gave them, and they looked at something called the mitochondria, which are these little tiny furnaces that make energy in all our cells. And they look like little footballs with vertical lines in them when they're healthy. But they gave these poor lab animals heart disease by feeding them a high-fat diet, very much like what we eat when we go to McDonald's and stuff. Okay, and then they took some biopsies of those heart muscles, and those little footballs were now all distorted. They were not like a little football, and those vertical lines were all messed up, and so the mitochondria had been destroyed. And then they did something to elevate their levels of acetylcholine. They did so with a pharmaceutical called pyridostigmine. And after just 4 months of pyridostigmine at extremely low doses, the equivalent dose if we were human and we wanted to take that would be about 15 milligrams a day for someone my size, 180 pounds and 5'10". And so the drug is made for something called myasthenia gravis, which is problems with your muscles. And only the dose you'd be taking is probably 50 times higher than that dose to repair your mitochondria. So here's this really safe method showing how you can elevate mitochondria with a medication, but you could also do it by the way you eat, but with your exercise and with supplements. So that's the whole book is just unified by acetylcholine, but it touches every aspect from A to Z, brain to muscle, skin, lifestyle, cognition, everything. And I was excited about this, so I had to call this the beauty molecule. And it is. I mean, it's phenomenal.